part of recovery is the wisdom to not put yourself in situations that are beyond what you can withstand. When you're in a conversation and you feel yourself starting to get riled up, are you mindful enough to recognize that that has put a hair in your biscuit? It's really riled you up. That is the time to say, all right, let's change the subject. Or, you know what, I'm going to take a walk, or any number of things. The whole point of it is you recognize that that is your weak spot. Now, what are you going to do about it? Well, if you're smart, you'll get yourself out of that environment. You'll have an exit door, an exit strategy. You want to get out. You know, a great big part of staying emotionally healthy is not that you can just endure whatever is thrown at you. No, a lot of it happens up here in your brain. Are you smart enough to recognize that it is testing you? It is straining you. If you're smart enough for that, well, you can get yourself out of there. A woman says, I can trust my husband. He'll be faithful to me no matter what. Well, is that guy spending every night at the strip bar? Why can she trust her husband so much? Because he's not putting himself in those circumstances to begin with. That's why she can trust him. The man is trustworthy not because he can endure every single situation, but rather because he doesn't even put himself in those situations. Or when he does find himself in situations that he recognizes are his weak spot, he gets out of there, or he avoids it altogether. A buddy of mine, his name's Mike, lived up north, black guy, but he told me a story where he had been out at a bar drinking, and some guy said some things to him, and somebody broke him up. I think they were about to get into a fight outside this bar, and Mike went out to his car, had a brick in the car, a brick, come up to the guy and threw that brick and hit him right in the side of the head with it, and it knocked him out cold. It was so violent. I would never, I said, do anything like that. When he told me the story, I was shocked. Like, Mike, what the heck were you thinking? Now, in his defense, when he was telling me this, he was telling me a story that had happened like 20 years earlier. So he wasn't still hitting people with bricks. It was something that bothered him too. But I remember telling him, like, man, I can't believe you even got to that point. I could never do anything like that. But never say never. If we allow ourselves to get into the right circumstances, especially if we're still emotionally unhealthy, many things that we think we could never do, we could do. There was an experience I had early on in my recovery. I was seeing a girl. She had a friend. The friend didn't like me. Without going into too much detail, he did something that was just rotten to me. And that night, I drove to his place in the middle of the night. I looked him up on the internet. I tried to find where he lived. I found what I thought was his home. And I drove to his home in the middle of the night, was on his doorstep, pounding on his door, ready to break the door down. And I was going to hurt him. I was really going to hurt him. And I'm not that type of a guy. I'm not a violent person. But I was so offended by the way that he had treated me that night. And I don't want to go into the details right now about what exactly he did, but it was a total slap in the face. It left me totally stranded, and I just couldn't believe it. I could not believe what he had done to me. And I took tremendous offense, and I just was not going to be happy until I got my revenge on him. And I was ready to hurt him that night. If I had had a brick. Now, I got through that experience, and I sobered up, and I went on to recover and get healthy and healthier and healthier and healthier, and to where I am today, to the point where I look back at that and think, oh my gosh, I'm so glad. By the way, he never did come to the door, and it turned out that I was at the wrong house. And whoever was in that house didn't come to the door. Can you imagine? I could have been shot right through the door that night, and they would have been justified in doing that because I was a threat. I was a drunken threat. So I think back to that, and I think, well, that was the weak spot. That was the weak spot early in my recovery, and I had this overconfidence that I could not be shaken that way, or that I could not reach that level of anger and hatred for another person. But I did. How much better it would have been, and wiser, if I had not allowed myself to even get into that situation. At that time, I was still living with an expectation of people, like a denial of reality. There are no people who are just evil and that will do evil things. Well, that night I learned there are. But if I had gone into that situation knowing that people will do some really evil things to you, you can't just trust everybody. That, like, not everybody who's friendly to you is your friend. Those are things I know now. But that early on in my recovery, boy, I did find the weak spot. And I'm just so fortunate and grateful that nothing really terrible happened that night. But think about the conversation I had with Mike, my friend, 10 years earlier, at least 10 years earlier, where he told me the story about hitting a guy in the head with a brick. It could have killed him. And me saying to him, just in total shock, Mike, how could you even reach that? How could you even allow yourself to get to that? I could never do that. And 10 years pass or more, I did get there. Under the right conditions, many things we think we would never do, we could do. So it is very important for all of us to pay attention to what is the weak spot. What is the weak spot in my health, in my emotional health, in my peace? Where is that weak spot? How can I strengthen it? How can I avoid certain situations altogether?